painstaking process of identification begins. This is the final step of the mission, leading to the return of an individual. In many of the cases, an important step in the identification process is DNA analysis, which is accomplished by cutting a bone sample that is sent to the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory. One of the challenges DPAA faces today is the lack of reference samples from family members of those still unaccounted for. Any person who is a relative of an unaccounted for American is encouraged to contact their service casualty office to ensure there is a DNA reference sample on file for that service member. DPAA makes an identification when all available evidence, remains, artifacts, and historical documents point to the same person. The ID process can take anywhere from a few months to several years to complete. Any unresolved cases are kept open with the hope that new evidence will be found or new technologies will be developed to make a future identification possible. Once an American has been identified, there remains a return to their family through their respective service casualty office. They are returned home with full military honors and given the respect they earned through their service and sacrifice for their country.
Oh, as a family member, this agency, to me, is doing phenomenal work, and in a very personal way, because when somebody loses somebody like my father, and you really don't know what the story is for 70 years, and then you find an agency that knows about him and keeps his memory alive, keeps the mission alive to try to find him. It's very meaningful in a very personal way, because it means you're not just doing this yourself alone. You have a whole body of people who are concerned about finding your dad and bringing him home.
That says something about how we honor our dead, particularly those who have served this nation. I'm very grateful to all of the DPAA and related agencies and the military in general, as they've pursued this in our government, and for our citizens, because they think it's an important enough mission to continue. And the way we value life, and very few nations, I don't think any other nation to this degree does this.
Which, makes me proud to be an American.
I just wanted to yell openly to everybody out there, he's home, he's home. I couldn't believe it. And when I went up and touched his name, I thought, you're home, you're home. It's unbelievable. I'm glad I live in the United States of America, and that we have this attitude. Leave no man behind. We're so fortunate. I want you to know, and I know from my own experience, that if something's happened to you, we will be looking for you.
The men and women of the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency are united in their effort to recover and return as many of our missing personnel as possible. One more patriot return, one more family that now has answers. One more step in fulfilling our nation's promise.
Of course, there are no amount of words that really can explain what we do, and I think the video, thanks to Kevin Costner, really portrays what a day in the life of a DPAA person is. As I mentioned earlier, our mission is huge. With over 81,000 still unaccounted for, and 39,000, just over 39,000, the number that we think we can actually account for, it can be daunting at times. Our witnesses are aging, their memories are fading, especially in Southeast Asia. The acidic soil is eating away at the remains, and it is critically important that we not only stay dedicated, but that we stay fully committed every single day to bring your loved ones home. Next slide. For this year, here are all of the places we are planning to go. Right now, we have 137 individuals, personnel, deployed, both organic, meaning people that belong to DPAA, as well as partnered missions, terrestrial and underwater. We currently have individuals in Kiribati in the Philippines. Those are our partnered operations. And then our organic missions are in Cambodia, Myanmar, and Vietnam as of today. So as you can see, it requires not just a will, right, to get it done, but as you can imagine, it also requires us building and sustaining a relationship with those nations that we are now going into to hopefully recover our lost veterans. Next slide. Let me touch on real quickly, because I just forgot, on that previous slide, there was a question mark next to North Korea. As it stands right now, the North Koreans still have not answered our request to go in and conduct operations. What's unfortunate about that, truly, is that the window is starting to close for this year. Because largely, we are bound by the weather restrictions in North Korea. For those of you who have been in Korea, or maybe you've served in Korea, you remember the monsoons and how really, in many cases, dangerous they are. That's just how rough those monsoons are. And so for right now, even if the North Koreans come back, we won't be able to conduct the 2 joint field activities that we planned, and now it's down to 1. So we are still waiting for them to come back. As I mentioned earlier, we've been budgeted to go into North Korea, and so whenever they're ready, so are we. Here are our priorities. Again, should we be called to go into North Korea, that will take the first priority, and we will shift our organic teams to go in quickly. The plans are on the shelf, and so that's not too difficult. The other thing that I want to really highlight on this slide is the public portal, or the family web, FamWeb. It's that center photo that you see on the slide. That FamWeb was built for you. So I ask that you, hopefully sometime today, go to www.dpaa.mil and click on Families and visit the FamWeb, because that is a place where we, one, track our accounting by individual. We list case summary information there, and you can also look up your loved one's information. The one thing we would also like to ask and advertise is, when you go on that FamWeb, you'll notice that we have pictures for the majority of our servicemen that were lost. But there are some pictures that are still missing. So if you are one of those families where we don't have a picture of your loved one, please provide one for us. We would be most grateful and would love to go ahead and list that on our website. I mentioned the budget, but I didn't go into too much detail. So for this year, DPAA was given $169 million. That is a significant increase due to Congress providing ads, or called ads, on top of our budget to the tune of about $24 million. With that money, we will, of course, continue our organic operations, but we're also going to grow our partnering efforts. Because around the globe, with the exception of some countries that I'll talk about in just a minute, around the globe, our partners help us grow our capability to get into host nations and to conduct operations. So we will be growing those. We will also will be growing our research capability, working with universities and other research organizations, so that we can build each of the files with information that will allow us to, sometime in the future, conduct operations, precisely a recovery, but also to conduct disinterments. As many of you know who follow us, we can't just go in and disinter unknowns. There are certain gates that we have to meet before we have the authorization to do that. with the exception of the Korean War unknowns that are buried in the punch bowl. 2 years ago, we pushed forward a project to do Korean War disinterments out of the punch bowl to disinter 652. So if you're a family member of the Korean War and you believe your loved one is in the punch bowl, you no longer have to submit a request for us to disinter. We have a 7th phase plan that we are operating on right now. We're in phase 2. Next slide. A number of developments. Many of you have been following us as well with the 55 box turnover. There were many more than just 55 individuals, and a lot of the information I'm not going to give you because you're going to get some of this information later today in the other briefings, only to say that for right now we have we've made 43 IDs, but there are way more individuals represented in those 55 boxes than just the 55. We continue in Vietnam and Laos to benefit from improved cooperation. This year, we will celebrate the 35th year of cooperation for JFAs specifically, and then 25 years of diplomatic relations. So that is huge for us because obviously, you can't get into a nation unless they agree is the bottom line. And so we enjoy that with both Vietnam and Laos. We continue to improve our disinterment because largely that's to the benefit of our World War II families and our Korean families. Just as an example, this year, out of the 217 IDs we made, 111 were World War II disinterments specifically, and 29 were Korean War disinterments specifically. Next slide. And while we transition to that slide, we continue to grow our partnering efforts around the globe. Lastly, and in closing, this is a program I know that many people have asked us about, and we've been working on it, and it is finally here, new and improved. We have a website for volunteers, regardless of your background, but you have to be 18 years or older. We are looking for anyone who can contribute to this mission. If you go to www.dpaa.mil and along the top, click on volunteer, it will give you all of the information and requirements to volunteer with DPAA. We have a handful of people right now that work with us, and so we rely heavily on our volunteers to help us further this mission. Next slide. So I want to thank you all very much. Again, don't forget 2 things. Family reference sample, check Dr. McMahon's AFME's table. And then number 2, Todd Livick mentioned it earlier, please fill out the surveys. They are read, and we do implement your recommendations wherever we can. And I do read every single survey, even when it's 300 people that provide it. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
I think I just heard Ms. Winbush say she wants to do a lot of reading, so I challenge you all to fill out those surveys, please. Okay, at this time, we're going to transition to our remembrance ceremony. But before we go, and Mrs. Winbush had this on one of her slides, that this is a generational mission. If you are 12 or under, if I could get you to stand up, and if you need to stand up on your chair, do so, but do it very carefully and safely. I know we got 2 youngsters right back here. Now, I'm going to come talk to you after this. Don't be afraid when I come back to talk to you, and I just want to see what you know about your missing loved one. Okay? How old are you? You're 9 years old. And folks, the point here is what we're seeing more and more are that we're seeing the younger generation wanting to be a part of this mission. As we get older, we get up out of bed and we feel those pains. We need that younger generation generation to be a part of honoring your loved one, remembering your loved one. It can't just stop here at this room. It has to be a generational effort. So, with that, now if I could get everybody to go ahead again to look at the back of your agenda. And again, this is your opportunity to briefly honor your loved one. What I would ask that if you want to stand and remember your loved one, just raise your hand, and Captain Swanson or Sergeant Fairman will come with a microphone to you. And as a reminder, too, one of the comments that we always get on our surveys is sometimes it's hard to hear folks. So when you get the microphone, please just hold it so that you're talking directly into the microphone. Don't have it moving around, please. So that way everyone can hear your message about your loved one. So with that, I'll go ahead and open it up.
I'm Mari Ellingson, and I'm here with my sister Deanna. And our uncle was lost in Korea. He's in North Korea, so it may be a long time before he's coming back. But I wanted to let you know, because in another meeting that I went to, somebody let me know that you can have a full military honor ceremony, even if you don't have the remains. And we did this for my uncle up at Willamette National Cemetery. And he was a Marine, and it was so healing for our family to have that honoring. They were there with the rifles and the flag folding, and it was a beautiful ceremony. And my mother was there. She was very close to her brother, and for her, and she's no longer here, it was like it was so healing for her. And he now has a little plaque up at Willamette National. And I want to let you know that this is available for you if you contact the service where your loved one was a member of. And we're still hoping. Maybe North Korea will open up, but anyway, for our family, this was a very healing moment, and I'm grateful for the Marines for doing that. Thank you.
My name is Fred Crowder. My uncle Samuel W. Crowder was on Oklahoma, and I want to thank DPAA for getting him identified. We got a call August 29th of 2017. It shocked us because we never thought we'd live to see him come home. He returned to Louisville, Kentucky, December 7th, 2017, and we buried him December 9th. And for over 40 first, second, third, and fourth cousins, we thank you. Never give up hope.
My name is Rick Holland. I'm here with my mother Ann Holland, my sister Carolyn, and my sister Debbie. We're here for my father, Tech Sergeant Melvin Holland, one of 9 Commando Club circuit riders that remain unidentified from March 11, 1968, in Pati, Laos. We're thankful for everything you do. We're looking forward to the next excavation over there, and I'm looking forward to standing on that mountaintop one day and asking Pati to give the men back. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Mary Carlisle. I am the daughter of Lieutenant J.G. Harold Roberts Potterson, U.S. Navy pilot shot down over North Korea September 18th, 1951. We're hoping he's one of the unknowns buried in the punch bowl. He is the son of Eastern European immigrants and a first-generation U.S. citizen. He died for a country that they truly loved.
Good morning. My wife, Christine, lost her father September 3rd, 1951. She won't talk because she'll just cry. So she's another one that lost a loved one in North Korea. So just want you to. And he was a pilot, yeah.
My name is Glenn White. I'm here for my uncle, Glenn A. White, who was killed on the Utah on Pearl Harbor Day. And I thank everybody for doing whatever they can to find him. Still miss him. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Terry Francisco, and my brother's name was San Francisco. And yes, my parents named him after the city. He was shot down November 25th, 1968 on a reconnaissance mission. And it was a flight that he had volunteered for, so he was currently going to meet his wife on December 1st in Hawaii for R&R. I just want to let everyone know I can look around at different people in this room and see people I know, and mostly the family that I know, which are my casualty officers. I know that at any time that I have questions or need help on anything, I can reach out to them and I get an answer. So I want to thank Mr. McKeague, Johnny Webb, Frank Visor, who's been with our family since the 1970s when my mother was part of the National League of Families of POW MIAs. So I want you to know that the Department of Defense cares about your families, and they're doing everything they can, and we truly appreciate it. Well, thank you.
I'm Bill Souls, and my father was Sergeant First Class Louis Souls, who went to Korea in 1950 and fought in the Battle of the Naktong River all the way to the liberation of Seoul, and then up to Kunari, North Korea, almost on the border with Red China. And he was the medical clerk for the 38th Infantry Medical Company. And when they were evacuating Kunari, his first sergeant had been badly wounded. And so my father gave him treatment, and Sergeant Brewer survived to come home. And then my father was shot and never seen again. They weren't able to find his remains or anything. Then I want to thank Johnny Webb and everybody at Silhai and at DPVA for their good work.
I have hearing problems. Anyway, I'm here for John McAllister. He was a captain in the Air Force in Korea and 13th Bomber Squadron. We're not sure what day
My name's Denny Bernardi, and my uncle was missing in action in North Korea in Hellfire Valley, which was a valley where they were surrounded by the Chinese, and they knew it was coming on Thanksgiving that year. There were survivors that said the turkeys were dropped from the air, and they were just fattening them up for the kill, is what they were told, because no one was listening to them. They were trying to send back messages that the Chinese were all around them. They knew that. There were already a few light casualties. So Washington, D.C. and the generals weren't paying attention. A lot of heroes that were generals are not really heroes. If you really read the history, the heroes were on the ground. Anyway, when they went missing, they were the bridges on both sides were taken out. They were sitting ducks. I don't believe he'll ever come back unless he's in one of those 55 boxes, because a lot of those are from that area. But my father served in Korea. He was 16 and lied and went into the military to go find his brother. And he was at the point of no return when they did the prisoner exchange. And I have pictures of that. And there were a couple of U.S. soldiers that probably weren't right in the head that came across the bridge and went back into North Korea, which is sad. And there were a lot of North Koreans and Chinese that came to the south. He had a picture of his brother and showed it to everybody, and he didn't come back, and no one had seen him. But I want you to know there are still we are all Gold Star family here, and a lot of us don't call ourselves that. But there are Gold Star families today that are fresh. What I mean is from Afghanistan and Iraq. I work with those children, and some of them are very young. And so reach out and find out who those kids are. Tell them your stories. Tell them your names. Tell them that they're daddy. In this case, I know all daddies. There's some mamas, too, that were killed. We have 29 of them in my area where I work with these kids. And they're between the ages of 3, and we've got some in their 20s now. But it's fresh in their memories. And I just ask you, if you find somebody like that, talk to those children and let them know their parents aren't forgotten, and they are heroes. I know of one that was actually missing in action in Afghanistan for 5 days. His son probably doesn't know that his daddy was beheaded. His 6-year-old sat next to me and asked me about the bracelet I wear. And he asked me, is he dead? And I go, probably, and that confused him. And I told him that, well, they can't find him. And I told him he was in North Korea. He asked me that. And he asked me, is his bones still there? And that's from a child of a 6-year-old. And I said, they probably still are. But then he looked at me a little while later and he says, when I grow up, I'm going to become, and he used a big word, he said, an anthropologist. And I'm going to go find your uncle. And I told you, that kid stole my heart. So we're all family here, but there's still lots of young children. We're old children living this. But reach out and find those kids.
Can you hear me? There we go. Thank you. My name is Corone Callan Klopping. I'm here with my husband Paul to represent my dad, Arthur Delbert Callan, known as Bud, who was a navigator and a captain who was on a photo reconnaissance mission. The other 2 men in the plane were August Moutone and George Greenwell. And their plane was shot down by a Russian MiG, which we found out when Russia made the records of the Korean War available to the public. I'm here to thank you for bringing us all together. At our last meeting, I met through one of your case managers, the son of Lieutenant Moutone, and he had brought photos that his dad had taken and sent home that were of my dad. And it was so fun. And then I was able to share with him photos that I had of his dad. And we were always wondering who who were the mystery men cavorting with our dads, getting rib sauce all over their faces. So it was lovely being there with him. So thank you for all that you do. And I appreciate so much your commitment to the mission, your integrity, your honesty, your respect. Sometimes I'm discouraged, but I know, and I like to think, that you are cut from the same cloth as my dad in your service to your country and your family. Hi, my name is Brenda Wilkins. I'm here for Delma Wright Grissom. And he's in North Korea, died at 18, freshly over there. And been almost 70 years, and when my mama told me they didn't have any kind of a service saying, thank you for your service or anything like that, give them some sort of a remembrance. I work for the post office, so have many people I know, and I was able to give my mother a, what do you want to call it, Mama? A service of her brother to kind of give her a little bit of closure. Her and her sister on the siblings. The rest of them are all gone. And I want to thank y'all because y'all keep them in our minds and remind us they're still over there. And sooner or later, North Korea, hopefully, will let us go to Camp 5. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Brenda London, and my uncle was Staff Sergeant Roscoe Becker. You couldn't call him Roscoe, or he'd deck you. He was Sonny. And he was shot down on June 13, 1952, into the Sea of Japan when they were on reconnaissance. And he was shot down by 2 MiGs. And we know who the Russians were that did that because all of that was released. The only reason I'm standing is because I brought his photo album that he had put together 2 weeks before being shot down, and he listed the names of every single person in every single picture. So if there is anyone that is connected through the 91st Strategic Reconnaissance Squadron, I have the album.
I'm Jerry Malone, and I represent the Pennington family and the Riddle family and the Dempsey family. And who we're honoring is William Ross Pennington, who was part of the Anzio invasion, World War II, and they ran into some real serious firefights. Even though Rangers were involved, he was part of the right flank to take a position, and he was killed in that action. So I express my appreciation for all you've done. They're in the process of compiling the DNA and maybe a disinterment in the future. So thank you very much.
Good morning. Okay, thank you. My name is Kathy Hobbs, and I'm here to represent my dad, whom I never met. And the lady over here talked about being, her dad being first generation American. I'm first generation American. My dad was born in Canada. His parents immigrated from Europe. And the idea was to have his sons raised in a country where they wouldn't be required to go to war. My grandfather lost 3 sons. all within the same month. And as far as I know, none of my uncles have ever been, remains have ever been returned to the U.S. My dad is one of the missing. He was killed in November 10th, 1942 in Guadalcanal. No remains. So I'm hoping maybe he's in one of those little boxes and I can bring him home. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Martin Melvin Moore. I come from a family of 6 brothers. All 6 went in. One didn't return. That was my oldest brother. He got killed in North Korea. He got captured. I found out today that he was in the hospital when he got captured. After they put him on a death march, and he went through different villages, and he died of pneumonia in 1951. They got him in 50. So the whole regiment lost their colors. They got surrounded in North Korea. They were sent in. I thought he was in the transportation division, and they switched. When you're in the army, I guess you're always infantry. So they turned infantry, and they were surrounded. And we found out 40 years later that he had been captured and put on a death march. We didn't find out. We thought my mom and my dad passed away or he was killed at the time of 1950. But then they got him in 1951, and he died of pneumonia. So I'm here with my wife, and we probably never see his body. We'll probably never find it. But war is war. So thank you.
My name is Jacqueline Zabalvin, and I'm here in honor of my great uncle, Staff Sergeant Gerald Hardin, of the 512th Bombing Squad, 376th Bomb Group, who went down in World War II in the Adriatic Sea after his plane took heavy flak after a bombing run in Austria. And I want to thank the DPAA because my grandfather, his brother, passed away a few years ago, and he never recovered from the loss of his brother. In his 90s, he still couldn't talk about it, couldn't talk about him to us that many decades afterwards. And so it really wasn't until I was contacted by you to gather information about repatriation that me and my mother were able to start learning about him and asking the right questions and just being able to know who this serviceman had been in honor of our family and our country. And so I just really wanted to extend my gratitude to you all for keeping him alive in our family and in our hearts, and for your continued work. Thank you so much.
Hello, I'm going to give it a try. My name is Diane Lade, and I am here representing Lieutenant Commander Charles Lade. He was my grandfather. He served in both World War I and World War II. When he went in during World War II, pretty early on, he was taken prisoner by the Japanese, and yet made it largely through the war. But towards the end, of course, as we were moving our troops through the South Pacific, the Japanese began moving their prisoners back to the mainland Japan, to make the final stand. And my grandfather was among them. They put them on what some of you probably know about, known as hell ships. My grandfather was on one of those, where they suffered horribly. And eventually, as the ship made its way towards Japan, they were in harbor and they were bombed in 1945. And my grandfather died in that bombing. The other difficult thing about this is that this freighter that was carrying the prisoners of war was not marked as carrying POWs. And so it was bombed by friendly fire. was bombed by Allied fighters. So perhaps because of this, this was a very painful thing for my family, and we never talked about it, ever. So I was probably an adult by the time I even knew my grandfather was a POW. I just really never even knew what happened to him. So I guess one thing I wanted to say is I heard some people talking about, yeah, tell your children, let the children know. This is really important. I am so sorry this did not happen in my family, although I understand for some it was probably just too painful, and I appreciate that. The other thing, and I want to thank the DPAA for this, is in the process of my grandfather's remains are still in this harbor as far as we know. He's never been returned. But my cousin, a cousin who I did not even know I had, was contacted by the DPAA about my grandfather. And she, in turn, contacted me. And she is with me here today. My lovely cousin, Gloria Einfeld, and her husband, Carl. My husband's also here, David Schwartz. And this is the first time we have ever met at this meeting. So we appreciate that, and thank you.
Good morning. My name is Michael Bouchard. I'm the son of Lieutenant Commander Michael Orr Bouchard. He was shot down in Laos, the dark hole of the Vietnam War. In 1996, they found an A6 site where they thought he was to be shot down, and guess what? They found 2 Marines. Thank God for those families. So my father's site is actually still missing. With me is my son, Michael Christopher Bouchard. We didn't want juniors, so we all have different middle names. But I also want to pay homage and honor to my uncle, Air Force Major John Sanford Bouchard. He died last year. He was one of the founding members of the National League of Families, and he's been a longtime advocate. So I had these hats made at my dad's 50th anniversary, and shortly after that, my uncle died, so I had to redo them. And so he spent 50 years of his life. He was in on the actual attempt to find my father, and for 50 years he fought long and hard to bring my dad home, and he never got to see his brother come back. So to all of those that have been suffering longer than I have, 51 years now, my heart and my hat go out to you. We're all the same. We're going to fight to our last breath to bring him home, and I'm hoping my son follows that tradition. Thank you very much.
My name is Jeannie Brown, and I'm here with my daughter Janae Nair and my sister Mary Ellen Nepper and her son Jeff Bogstetter. And we're representing my father that died in North Korea at Camp 5, and he died April of 1951. My mother came to these meetings up until 2002. She found these meetings very, very difficult to attend because she never remarried. My father was the love of her life. But my sister and I have found these meetings to be very, very beneficial. So thank you very much.
Hello. Hope everyone's doing well today. I want to thank everyone for sharing. It's been very moving. My name's Trent Lloyd Walker, and I'm here with my father, Terry Walker, representing his father, my grandfather, Lloyd Francis Walker, who was shot down January 31st, 1967, in Laos. Wasn't going to say anything because this is my first time being here. It's the old man's 7th time. But the reason I wanted to say something is my grandfather, by all accounts, I never met the man, of course. I never met my grandfather, and I wasn't going to say anything. But I wanted to say that, my grandfather, by all accounts, was really loved and respected by all the men that served with him and served under him. And I wanted to say something to my dad. I wanted to make sure that he knows that we all think that he is loved and respected in much the same way, and kind of the legacy lives on. So that's all I really wanted to say.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Hoover. I'm here with my sister
Jennifer and my daughter Kaylin. We're here to honor my uncle, Private First Class, Robert McNeil. I've never met him. Always heard about him. Didn't know anything about him until we started, until DPAA looked at my sister, gave her a whole bunch of information, and we're just here to keep his memory alive. He died in Camp 3 in North Korea. If there's anybody here that may have known Private First Class Robert McNeil, we'd like to share some memories. We don't know what those memories are, but our hearts touch yours. Thank you.
On the side of the room, over in the corner, she's going to be sitting down.
My name is Ann Scott, and I'm here representing Dane Vanderlyn Scott, Lieutenant Commander. And he was shot down in '67 by 2 MiGs. He was in a A6 Intruder at the time, and Dane really loved his job. You know, he had wonderful ideas about what he was going to do with his career in the Navy, and I was all for it. He had flown 40 missions, and I couldn't possibly think he would not come home for 41. I mean, I wasn't quite 18 years old yet. I would have been 18 the next month. But anyway, I grieved privately when I got the news. My whole life was destroyed, and I didn't want to live anymore because he was everything to me. He was like a new parent because I was so young, and I just, my whole world crumbled. So grieving privately with his cousin, we just sort of set aside our grief and shared memories of Dane and just kind of let it go. I never married again. And, but I joined the DAV. And when I joined the DAV, bingo, there was a link. I was introduced to a man named Dick Lovegren. And he contacted me, and he told me about an organization that I should be a part of. And because of that, part of my life was restored. No longer did I grieve privately with the cousin. I brought his cousin, Dane's cousin, in, and he joined. So I joined, he joined, and the rest of my family joined. And we're just so glad that you're here. It gave me a new life, a new way to love him. And after that, I found out that his family never did anything. They are grief buried, they died, and they left no pictures, nothing. He would have never been recognized if it hadn't been that we had been contacted by Dick Lovegren and been able to join this organization. And I want to thank God for this organization. I want to thank the organization for itself, because I know that I'm not alone in this, and a whole lot of people have had the restoration of their relationships and their contacts with their loved ones because of this organization, and I will fully support it for the rest of my life.
Thank you. My name's Andy McCormick, and I'm here representing my uncle, Technical Sergeant John J. Halloran, from Stoughton, Massachusetts. He was in the U.S. Army Air Force, and he was in the 401st Bombardment Squadron. He was a radio operator on a B-17 bomber, and on August 17th, 1943, the plane was attacked as part of a bombing mission over Germany, and was shot down and crashed. I learned from DPAA and the history that they provided with me that we knew for a long time that his remains are not recoverable, but they may have found something in an excavation of the site, so we're looking forward to more information about that. I never knew my uncle because he died before I was born. He's my mother's brother, and There's one surviving sister who's been contacted as well, and I'm in contact with her and my brother. I'm the oldest of the cousins in the family, so none of the cousins knew Uncle Johnny, but his birth date was December 1st, 1920, which means that this December 1st will be the 100th anniversary of his birth. And I am now planning to provide this information to all my cousins, and maybe we can get together for a remembrance ceremony. So thank you very much for the information.
One over here.
Good morning. My name is Leland Ritchie. I'm here with my sister Sharon, and we're here on behalf of our two brothers and our 94-year-old mother who live in Eugene. And we're remembering our father, Lieutenant Leland R. Ritchie, a naval aviator who was shot down over water over Wonsan Bay, Korea, May 6, 1953. There's not a lot of hope of recovering, but we can always remember. And thank you to DPAA.
Good morning. I'm Dick Lovegren. Thanks, Ann. Didn't know where you were, but I know where you're at now. I'm here with my wife, Debbie, my sister, Shirley, my granddaughter, Lacey, and her boyfriend, Brett. We're here supporting my brother, Corporal David E. Lovegren. Killed in a helicopter crash, body not recovered on March 1st, 1969. We're still searching for those answers. There's been 6 trips back to that site with no success yet, but we keep up the hope. For the newcomers, I want to comment on the gal that spoke first about the military honors funeral. I'll tell you how that came about. It was 2 families in Oregon working with Senator Mark Hatfield. Those families were my mother and father, and unfortunately I don't know the other family. But through then, Senator Mark Hatfield, up and to include my brother's death, could not have a military honored funeral. Well, those 2 families and Mark Hatfield got that changed in Congress. So it is an Oregon-based effort. It started here first, and I don't know, as a matter of fact, if my brother was the first one to ever get those honors, but he was among one of the first. So that's how that happened. Public service announcements real quick. Ann was talking about some of the organizations she's involved with. One of those is the National League of POW/MIA Families for Southeast Asia, better known for their iconic POW/MIA flag. I am the Oregon coordinator for that organization. If I can help anybody from Southeast Asia with any of your pursuits, come pick my brain. I brought a few of my business cards. You'll recognize me with this. Probably the only one wearing one of these. And that's the reason for it, so you can pick me out in the crowd. So, newcomers, there's a wealth of information out there. Pick and prod everybody you can. One piece of advice I give everybody: every service organization in the country produces a monthly or bi-monthly magazine. Seek out those people that were in your loved ones' units. They're out there. I know the guys that were there at the Hilltop the day my brother Kirk died. I go to their reunions as often as I can. Get a lot of information for those gentlemen. There were 30 of them on that Hilltop. So good luck with your endeavors, and I hope you have a successful meeting today. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Barbara Wands. I'm here with my sister Jan Dressler. We are representing our grandfather, Lieutenant Commander Rudolph Bilka, who was killed aboard the USS Utah. He was the highest ranking officer on ship that was killed that day. He was officer of the deck because the captain was on shore leave, and his official responsibility was damage control. We had different reports, people seeing him on deck. They said he took a direct hit. There was someone else who said they saw him on the aft deck. And the most interesting one was my father was also in the Navy, in the Naval Reserve. He was on a cruise, I think it was in the 60s, off Vancouver Island. And on board, an officer came up to him, noticed his name tag, and asked him if he had a family member in the service. My dad said, well, my dad was, but he was killed on the Utah. And that man looked at him and he said, I have to tell you how your father saved my life. And that was a really special thing to find out. You know, we never knew him, and we just want to find out as much as we can and honor him in that way. Thank you.
My name is Arthur Cunis, and I'm here. I'm here about my father, Lieutenant Martin Stern. January 16th, 1944, his B-24 that he was being transported to Britain exploded, and the 7 guys that were on that plane all died. In 1945, the Army went back and recovered 5 of the 7 who were on the plane, leaving my father, Lieutenant Martin Stern, and Lieutenant Palmer, who still are there. And that was in what is now Guyana, from which many of those bombers were transported to Europe and Africa.
I am Judith Lowry Irvin, and I am representing the other family that Senator Hatfield helped. How about that? Bingo! I didn't know that until he got up and spoke, so I hope we can connect and talk later. My brother was lost 18 June 1965 in a mid-air collision with B-52s, the first bombing run over Vietnam. It was a snafu from the start, but we don't talk about that. My husband, retired Commander Robert Irvin, Navy Air, he flew 99 missions, Vietnam. He retired after 25 years, and I just lost him 2 years ago. Anyway, I hope we can connect and talk.
I'm Mark Mulder, the son of Second Lieutenant John T. Jack Mulder. It's nice to return to the city of Roses, where I was born 5 days before my father was missing. He never knew I was born. He was a graduate, 1938 graduate of Fort Vancouver High School, all-state basketball player, a member of that 1938 team, which Meg Wachik just 2 or 3 years ago wrote an article on that team and talked about the conditions in Vancouver. I want to thank DPA for giving me more information this morning than I've been able to find. I also want to thank all the Dutch families that adopted graves and names on the tablets of missing of where my father's name is located. The Dutch have adopted every name and every grave in that cemetery. They've started something that I'm going back to in May called the Faces of Margraten. And in that Faces of Margraten, a young man who's now 21, 22, I met him 2 years ago, wanted to put a picture of every soldier or airman with every grave and on the tablets of missing. They're up over 7,000 now. And it is an incredible thing. It means more to me to go to that than to go to the Memorial Day ceremony, which I've been to many times. But Ed Verts and I have been out to the village where my father was missing with metal detectors and looking, and now we have something more to take with us to do some more searching. But a big thank you to DPA. My dad went on to play for Slutskill down at Oregon State, and I was reading some stuff that my mother gave to me that I just pulled out of a box before I came down here. And 3 members of that team, John Mandick, who was an All-American, Sam Dement from down in the Coquille area, and my dad all went into the Army the same day. And it was really kind of interesting reading and catching up. But thank you, DPA, for giving me some good information. We're still searching.
Good morning. My name's Brian Corcoran. I'm here with my wife, Sandy. Today, I'm here representing my uncle, Patrick Francis Corcoran. He was lost on the island of Bataan in 1942, July. He went missing. He lied to get in the service. He was 16. So I'm here to close it for my grandmother and my dad. Bring them home. So thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jerry Royer. I'm here representing my cousin, Ronnie, and his wife, Polly Royer. I had the honor to respond to his request to go to D.C. I'm sorry. I had the honor to respond to his request. I served as a first responder in the Air Force for 8 years of my life. And I got out when St. Helens blew her stack when I was stationed at Fairchild, so I got to enjoy some of the dust. Anyhow, 2 summers ago, he asked. My wife and I responded along with my sister. And we got to go through the full ceremony. Never been to one, and it was just very poetic, the way those guys and gals did their job. Us also, the general that was there with us. Then the last thing he asked me, would you go up and stand beside my dad's headstone? Because my uncle's still in North Korea, as far as we know. I said, sure. 30th degree incline, not easy. Couldn't stand beside his headstone, so I got him behind, put my toes up against it, so I could do this. So I cried, and he cried. It's the best we could do for him. Amen.
Hi, my name is Joella Alderete Livesey, and I'm here representing my uncle, Captain Reynaldo Gonzalez. We're from New Mexico, and this is my mom's older sibling. My mom is the youngest of her family. She's 86. She'll be 87 in June. She doesn't think she will be alive to see him brought home. So my older siblings have kind of taken the torch, and my oldest sister will be 69 in a couple of weeks. And she called me and said there's going to be a conference in Portland if you're interested in going. And I said, of course I am. And I brought my 2 children. But I wanted to share that I was telling some friends that I was going to be here, and they, a couple of their responses was, wow, that's amazing that people still care. Because this was World War II, and he was, in 1942 killed in the Bataan Death March. So I just wanted to share that and say thank you for still caring, and how inspiring and wonderful it is to be here. It just thank you.
We're a duo. My name is Candace Gonsalvo Noakes. This is my son, John Higgins. I am the sister. We're gonna try to do this. I am the sister of Captain John Wadsworth Gonsalvo, Jr. from the Marine Corps. He was a pilot. He served 2 tours in Vietnam. He flew 150 missions. He was flying over the DMZ on May 7th, 1972, and his plane was hit. His Rio was in the back, and my brother was heading for the ocean, and he ordered the Rio out, and so the Rio ejected, and the plane went down, and the Rio was saved. We picked him up the next day. We do not know what happened to him. He's still missing, although he is presumed dead. But we are still looking for him. I did turn in my DNA. My mother did. My sister did. So I would recommend that you do that. We did that years ago. Because if they can find anything, we all want them back, don't we? We do. My mother, Martha Ann Consalvo, was one of the original members of the National League of Families. My husband here, Greg Noakes, my son, John, and I are all members of the National League of Families. He's, what did you say? Oh yes, he was saying that Mother's greatest sadness was that Jack has not been found yet. And the tears come because she passed away in June, 95 years old. But she was at every meeting in D.C. and she lived in Virginia and spoke at many events. Right before she passed away, we received information. My son is on Facebook, and he was informed by some women back in North Carolina. Do you want to
Some ladies in North Carolina posted on the Facebook page that I administer for my Uncle Jack that they had found a Bible, just a small little Bible that had writing in it, and they wanted to get it back. This is the same John W. Consalvo, and started connecting with these ladies, some nice ladies, and the Bible, once I received it, and my grandmother was delighted, as was my mom and all of our family. I know other people probably want to speak. I'll try to keep this brief, but pretty incredible. The Bible was originally given in 1943, 42, to my grandfather, her brother, my Uncle Jack's father, right before he went with Patton's Third Army to fight World War II. And he went, that Bible went through France, and the Battle of the Bulge was with the 6th Armored Cavalry when they liberated Buchenwald, and into Germany, and then it came home, and then it went again with my grandfather to Korea, and then it came home, and then it went with Jack to Vietnam, and we lost it, or it was somehow lost or whatever, and then it ended up in North Carolina, and some people had the care to send that back to us. Which came about a month or two before my grandmother passed. So that was really powerful. And then lastly, in I think 1980, pretty proud of this. Some of you may see, these bracelets that we Yeah. Um, about 1980, I think my grandmother was speaking for POWMIA, and she was also helped set up the Gold Star Mothers of Virginia, right? And my grandmother and grandfather were contacted because they were so involved in POWMIA, and by a local, up-and-coming, pretty established musician who was very patriotic and putting together some amazing music. And that was Lee Greenwood. And we love him and have communicated with him. And he's met with my mom and my sister, and I've talked with him not too long ago. And if you see him singing or when he's playing and doing his thing, because he loves the military, he loves patriots, you know, he's a patriot, he still wears Jack's.
Jack's POWMIA bracelet. Thank you, and thank you all so much for what you do. I can't thank you enough. Please bring him home.
Lee also said that he's going to continue to wear, he told me this last year, that he's going to continue to wear Jack's bracelet until he's returned.
Hi, I'm here on behalf of Senior Staff Sergeant Dayton Palvido. I'm also here for my mother, Dayton was her brother. Picture a young girl, 16 years old, orphaned at 16. Edna, the mother, was Dayton's next of kin, and she died just a few months before Dayton went missing. So this was a story that my mother told to me many, many times, that it was a blight on the family because the family kind of fell apart at that point. Nothing was ever done. There was no funeral or anything for Dayton. So I'm here on his behalf. I tried many times to do a lot of research by the Google, you know, looking around. Imagine my surprise when I get a phone call out of the blue. I did not know any of this existed. I didn't know anything. And they asked me if I knew who Dayton Palvido was, and I said yes. And I got very excited. The lady got a little scared on the phone, actually, because I got so excited. But I've provided my DNA now, and Dayton went missing in the battle, I think the Battle of the Bulge, around the 12th of December, 1944, when they were crossing the River Saar. And I want to thank the DPAA as well, because I just didn't know it existed. I didn't know we did these type of activities, and I'm really, really proud that we do. And my hope for all of you is that you won't be here next year. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Randy. I'm here representing my great uncle, Colonel Howard Perry, who was a 1918 graduate of West Point, was stationed in the Philippines when it was overrun by the Japanese in December of 41, and then they surrendered in May of 42, and he was a POW there in the Philippines until December 44, and then they were transferred on the hell ships. He survived the sinking of one of them, was put on another one. The family story was that he survived that one and made it to the beach and was shot. The documents here say it was he went down on the ship. So kind of interesting to find out what happened. Thank you.
I beg your forgiveness. I forgot one major detail about why I was here for my cousin. This is for his dad, which is Captain Robert Boyer, which is my dad's brother. Had big dreams to do things after he got back from the action.
If I get this thing in the right position, it won't be a whisper. But anyways, I just wanted to let you know that all of you are going to grieve. I grieve. We're going to do this. We're doing it together, and that's a good thing. So pray for each other every day. But anyhow, he was shot down by a MiG. All of the crew but one didn't make it home. They don't know the total story about the tail gunner. The captain said to bail, and that's where he stands. Anyways, the group he was with was the 71st Bombardment Squadron. He joined another group from the 307th Bombardment Squadron. MIA, 13 September 52. A month later, I was born, 13 November 52. So I never met him, never knew him. All I had was a picture to look at. They changed it to KIA, 28 February 54, and at that time, he was promoted from first lieutenant to captain. So thank you very much for your patience and time.
Good morning, I'm Vicki Love, and I'm representing my uncle, Victor, who died about 7 months before I was born. And he was at the Battle of Tarawa, so we're very happy that you place us with folks who can relate to our loved ones. Maybe they knew each other, your loved one and ours. And my mommy is here. Her name is Edna Leitner, and for many years she has grieved her brother, and we would just like to tell you, I don't know it, so it'd be kind of interesting afterward if there's someone older, but Mommy, would you like to tell them how old you are?
I'm going to be 104. Anybody need a ride back to Portland with me? Oh, don't get scared. It's my daughter that's going to drive.
We do thank you, and she did bring a few albums, and so if anybody was in the Battle of Guadalcanal or in Tarawa, there might be someone who would relate to your loved ones. And we also want to thank our government because my uncle, although his remains were never accounted for yet, but we find out that Tarawa has had some recent discoveries of late, and we're hoping that maybe Uncle Vic will be among them. And he was in the Marine Corps, private first class, and we are very thankful he's mentioned in Honolulu in the memorial there, and we were able to have a marker at the Willamette Cemetery where we can go and recognize him, and that really means a lot.
Hello, I'm Merritt Davis, and with my wife, Lori here, representing my father, Major Merritt Davis. He was a F-51 pilot and was lost in a mission over North Korea, 14 August 1951. And I would like to thank the DPAA and also the Air Force Casualty Office for all the help they provided. This is a great organization and time well spent here, so thank you very much.
All right, folks. Duty, honor, country. Thank you all for sharing your memories. Now, I did notice that the youngsters just walked out the door. If I could get them, because what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring them up and get a picture with the young lady. Right? All right. Okay, so at this time, what we'll do, we're going to take a break, and I believe they're prepared now that you can go do your lunch order if you haven't already. Maybe it's already open. But if I could ask that everyone be back in and seated at 11 o'clock. And Mom, can I get the boys?
When we found out that Senior Airman Johnson was coming, goosebumps. This was big, especially for me, because I was here. Very, very proud that she's able to come. I can't think of anything more rewarding than that.
I saw that I was slotted for Vietnam, and it was the month of my dad's anniversary, so I had a lot of mixed emotions. Like, I was excited, and then it kind of hit me like, wow, I'm going to do the exact same thing that he did. What I remember the most is my dad always being gone and then coming back with stories. I was actually 9 when he passed, but I was in Hawaii, so my whole childhood, I just remember him being in DPAA.
He was a big man, but he was also just a really, really nice man. He had been on multiple missions before the accident, so I knew him as the team sergeant, and he came through, set up for his teams, etc., pulling equipment from the warehouses.
They were telling me stories and talk about how awesome he was at his job. Like, it really touched me. It was great to hear, and then it pushed me to make sure I tried my best when I was here. Going through this mission, like, it just opened my eyes a little bit more about what we do and what has been done in history, and the lives that we lost. And it kind of hit me that I'm here. I'm a part of this now, so I kind of want to continue on strong. I felt like I was finishing his mission for him. It really motivated me to try my best for him. The mission as a whole, what we're doing, why we're here, I think it's pretty cool, and it makes it worth it. I'm proud of myself. Like, I never would have imagined doing anything like this. It's kind of amazing to know that people are still remembering him, and not just him, but everyone that was a part of that crash. So it's heartwarming to know that other people care.
It's still a raw nerve for all of us. It was a hard time. After 17 years, you think it gets easier. It doesn't. He's missed, along with the rest of them, very much so. I'm just happy that his daughter was able to come and be a part of this. And I know he's proud. I know he's looking down and smiling.
We found out in March of this year that he'd been identified.
And salute!
I knew of him from when I was a kid, but at that point in time, he was kind of more urban legend. It's just embracing the fact that his spirit was an ornery spirit.
He was definitely a sailor.
We're gathered here to honor his memory as one of those brave warriors. And now, after all these years, we are finally able to properly bring him to his final rest.
Ceremonial at ease.
You know, this isn't just meaningful to us, it's meaningful to a lot of people. Just amazing part of history that we're working with right here. This isn't just our funeral, this is everybody's funeral. And to me, this is, I think anybody who feels moved to pay their respects, they should be able to. It's such an honor to have that service member walk up to you and hand it to you, and it's like, is that, like I said, it's too special. It's too precious to have her look you in the eye and talk to you as she's handing it off. It makes your heart full. Your emotions just kind of explode. I wasn't quite deserving of it because it is so special.
Derek's mannerisms and everything. It's so much like the father. I wish I had a video going.
I'm incredibly humbled to be here today. We are as confident as we can be within the limits of our science that those remains, at least in part, represent your husband.
a nice picture. Hey, that's a good-looking guy. These two are so similar, you know. When he starts talking, you know he's local boy. I miss you.
We hadn't heard from him in about 3 months, and Mama undoubtedly felt something. So when the news came, she just had to lay down. And she laid on the bed and sent for me. I was at work at the Spalding High School in Springfield. So I immediately went home to be with my mother.
Just surprised, shocked, unbelievable, really.
I was happy to know that after all these years, somebody, somewhere, was concerned enough to call us.
Yeah. That meant a lot.
I think the good Lord is in it.
Yeah.
Because how could they have waited all these years and then came to us to bring some relief? It's really a relief to know something about what really happened to him.
Don't give up.
I just hope you all will continue to do this kind of work, to follow up on so many of the lost ones. It means a lot to us, and I know it will mean the same to them. It's a wonderful job you all are doing following up after all these years. We thought we would never hear anything else. So thank you so very much for taking time to come and work with Hoover. Because it's work you all do, and you do it every day, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, folks, if I could have everyone take their seats, please. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get back started. And first off, I do want to apologize for those of you who stood in line, and I know there are some that are still standing in line, to place your lunch order. You know, but it's like the military, because it's hurry up and wait and stand in line. But I do apologize, and you can comment on this as well. Please do. But just know that, you know, we just want to make sure that you have lunch, so I'm so sorry. Okay, so with that, we're going to go ahead and continue. And again, just as a reminder that this is on live stream, so that if you do miss something, if you had a one-on-one and you missed a briefing that you wanted to be a part of, that you can go to our archive site on dpa.mil, and that's MIL. And it's about halfway down the screen, and there'll be an archived link. And Sergeant Everett, do we have any updated numbers? Okay, so I'll get those in a little bit. So at this point in time, we're going to go ahead with a policy update, and Lieutenant Colonel George Nuno.
All right, good morning. As Mr. Livick said, we've got this on live stream, so if there's anyone at your table that misses what I say, just let them know that they can look it up on live stream. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lieutenant Colonel George Nuno. I am the Chief of the Knowledge Management Division within the Policy and Plans Directorate. I'm here today to discuss the roles of policy and plans and how it supports the personnel accounting mission. This briefing will cover three things. First, provide an overview of the mission and the key players. It will describe the role of policy and plans within the mission. And lastly, it will outline each of the major conflicts we are responsible for. So our mission, as was mentioned earlier, to provide the fullest possible accounting for our missing personnel to their families and the nation. As I go through this presentation, I would like for you to understand several key points. One, our mission is governed by U.S. laws and Department of Defense directives. Two, the unaccounted for list includes the following wars: World War II, the Cold War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Persian Gulf War. Each conflict is different, as well as the approach taken when accounting for our missing personnel from each respective conflict. And one final point, we must always remember we are guests in the nations that we work in. Therefore, we must obey the host nation's laws, rules, and regulations. Scope of personnel accounting operations. This slide represents where on the globe we still have Americans missing or unaccounted for from past conflicts. Just under 82,000 Americans are still missing or unaccounted for from World War II to present. The overwhelming majority were lost in the Pacific area of operations, where the Korean War and Vietnam Wars were fought, and where the bulk of the World War II missing were lost. However, we need to put this number into perspective. Of those approximately 82,000 losses, 40,000 of these losses occurred over water, most in very deep water, where unfortunately the chances of recovery remain extremely challenging. Of the remaining number, our analysts assess that approximately 39,000 are potentially recoverable. This means we believe we have something, such as an eyewitness account or an after-action report, which we can build a case on. Bottom line, without a case file, it is very difficult to conduct an investigation or recovery. Past accounting offices and agencies. Also what we like to call our family tree. Many of you have asked about past offices and agencies. Some of you may be familiar with predecessor organizations, such as the Joint POW MIA Accounting Command, JPAC, displayed here in yellow, or the Defense POW Missing Personnel Office, DPMO, also displayed here in yellow. This slide provides a historical representation of various past offices and agencies that performed personnel recovery in some capacity from 1966 to present, displayed here from top to bottom. Over time, these offices have merged, ultimately consolidating in late 2015 under DPAA, Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. DPAA is the lead organization responsible for accounting for missing U.S. personnel from past conflicts. Personnel accounting community and partners. So the important takeaway here is that although DPAA is the U.S. government agency responsible for past conflict, we cannot accomplish our mission without cooperation and partnerships with the entire accounting community, both government and non-government agencies and offices. The magnitude of the task before us requires a large network of community partners, some of which you will hear from later on today. I will actually be describing a few of them now, starting with service casualty offices displayed here in light gray, also known as our SCOs. SCOs are the key interface between families and the U.S. government accounting community. Each of these services maintains its own casualty office. This is the first line of communication between the families of unaccounted for personnel and the Department of Defense. Secondly, the Armed Forces Medical Examiner System, also displayed here in light gray, known as AFMES. AFMES is responsible for the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory, known as AFDIL. If you have contributed a DNA sample, you have had contact with AFDIL. If you haven't, as many of you know already, there is a station right outside where you can provide a reference sample. The AFDIL briefing later today will explain the importance of submitting a DNA reference sample. With each passing day, DNA plays a greater role in the identification process. Moving on, we have the State Departments. We could not do this mission without the active support of our ambassadors and country teams. Our defense attaches work out of the embassies around the world, and they assist tremendously in advancing our global mission. State Department continues to be a strong partner and a true force multiplier. Moving on, we have combatant commands. DPAA regularly works with respective combatant commands, such as the U.S. Pacific Command and the European Command, to garner full cooperation and support within the host nations. To accomplish this, we have a formal executive order from the Secretary of Defense, which outlines the roles and responsibilities of combatant commands in support of our mission. Next, we have the services. Each respective service provides support to our mission by providing military personnel, many of which these personnel conduct field operations and provide analytical and logistical support to our mission. Followed by the intelligence community. So without going into too much detail, it is important to know that the full range of the assistance within the national intelligence community is at our disposal when needed. NARA, the National Archives and Records Administration. NARA is critical to the success of our archival research. Oftentimes, the National Archives is the starting point for research and case development. And lastly, we have our non-government entities. There are a variety of universities and independent researchers that we partner with to contribute to our mission. Without any of one of these partners, DPAA could not provide answers to you, who remain our most important partner in this mission. So policy. What is policy? Policy comprises three major components. To quote our former Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, policy imposes reason over impulse. This speaks to deliberate planning to achieve the highest level of success possible. The policy division of our directorate develops our strategic and operations plans, which are executed by our regional directorates. Furthermore, policy develops the requirements to implement the federal statutes governing our mission. This is accomplished through drafting DoD directives and instructions. An example of an instruction we are currently working is known as 2310. This instruction establishes past conflict accounting, policies and responsibilities, and provides additional guidance and solidifies the accounting community throughout all of the Department of Defense. Essentially, it standardizes communication throughout all of the accounting community. In short, policy provides the basis to enable the operators to do their job. So key policy initiatives and functions. The first step in conducting operations in any country is engagement. To accomplish this, we have to establish a foreign engagement and access policy. For an agency geographically dispersed across Hawaii, Washington, D.C., Nebraska, Ohio, Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, and Germany, this policy formalizes how we engage at the highest levels of government to support all operations throughout DPAA. This includes joint field activities, archival research, establishing memorandums of understanding with foreign governments, and national budgeting. This policy also synchronizes engagement, ties U.S. government concerns, policies, and objectives to regional directorates. Essentially, it ensures maximum synchronization across all the agency. Also essential to our success is ensuring coordination, communication, and collaboration with the Department of Defense. We are in daily contact with our counterparts at the Pentagon and across the U.S. government. This ensures all parties are fully appraised of our activities, particularly in foreign countries, and we understand the positions of various U.S. government entities that impact our mission. The disinterment program is growing and is resulting in more accounted for each year than any other operation we undertake. We have three major projects: the USS Oklahoma project, the Korean War project, and the Palesti project. Combining individual requests to projects makes the process more efficient, allowing the analyst to focus on the incident or geographical region and reducing overall time required to request and obtain approval of disinterment. As such, we are planning to group more requests in a similar fashion. This concludes my portion. Hopefully you're able to understand policy and plans a little better, provide some insight into how policy and plans supports the overall DPAA mission. I'll be here for the rest of the day, and I look forward to chatting with you. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Owen O'Leary, and I promise, despite my appearance, I am an archaeologist. I'm going to need you to imagine for a minute that about 150 days a year I've got like a dirty t-shirt and some permanently stained cargo pants, boots, a Deschutes Brewery baseball cap that's generally so dirty my wife won't let me bring it in the house. I need to hustle along today to keep us on schedule, so I'm going to go through a lot of material pretty quickly. If you have any questions about field work, what we do in the field, laboratory processes, lab analysis, or anything like that, you can stop me at any point today as you see me around the hall, and I can answer all of your questions. Also with me today is Mindy Simonson. She's up here to your left. She is also another archaeologist, and you can stop her if you have any questions about the lab or field work or things like that. I'm going to talk about recovery and identification. We're going to go over 4 quick topics: field ops, lab ops, the identification process. We're going to go through a case study. I'm going to walk you through that, and then we're going to do a special projects update and tell you a little bit about that. Field operations, we run them worldwide, anywhere that the United States was engaged in military activity from World War II up through Vietnam is where we work. Across the entire world, we are informed by our research and external partners on where we're going to go conduct work. So those are our archaeological recoveries. There are some of them going on right now as we speak in a few parts of the globe. We also do disinterments of unknowns. Many of you are probably familiar with that. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We do most of our disinterments out of the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, and we also do a lot of disinterments out of the Manila American Cemetery and Memorial in the Philippines. Archaeological recoveries are a controlled destruction of a site. We only ever get to excavate it once, which means that's why there is always a professionally trained, experienced archaeologist on the team to record everything that is happening and everything that is being observed to ensure that we collect the most amount of data possible while we're doing that recovery. A lot of that information that we collect in the recovery is very informative towards the laboratory processes that are going to go on later. And so we do that. We record spatial relationships between items of evidence. We are also looking at site transformation. A very important thing is that these sites were created decades ago, and so landscapes have changed, erosion has occurred, lots of things have happened. So not only are we trying to put together the incident that occurred itself, but also how that landscape has changed over time, because that informs us on where we need to continue to excavate to hopefully find more evidentiary materials. We read sediments. After a lot of training, you can look at what may just be a wall of dirt in an excavation unit, but to us, we see this. We see multiple layers of stratigraphy. We see pieces of incident-related material, which are the white arrows, and we also see features or modifications to this, which is what you can see in the white circle. Differences in soil color become very important. You can see the center section in that photograph is definitely a different color. Sometimes soil changes aren't always so evident. And by recognizing that, we can take the appropriate steps in excavation, adjust tools and things like that to make sure that we proceed with the best methods possible. So we do a high amount of spatial control. We need to know what was found where and what those items were found in relation to other items in the site. So was a watch or something like that found in direct association with some osseous remains or bones? We use a grid system for this that we put out across the landscape, hills, wherever we need to put this in, and then we carefully map everything as we're recovering it. We use a variety of methods. Sometimes we will use an excavator when appropriate. You can see here this sort of an exploratory excavation to sort of scrape away the top surface to see if there are soil color changes. We do work underwater. One of our members of expeditionary support, it's an Army captain, he's in uniform. He is our dive officer, and he is constantly running underwater missions. We have underwater archaeologists who do this. Everything I do on land, they do underwater. Very, very impressive. We use hand excavation methods, is probably our most common. Shovels, picks, direct physical work. A lot of cases are on mountainsides where you can't take an excavator, so it's the crew, and you're going to get it done. We screen all the sediment we excavate. All the sediment gets screened through 1/4-inch mesh screens. Sometimes we use wet screening if we're working in a rice paddy or a real wet environment, or we have really dense, sticky clay. We'll use water to help us screen away the dirt, and when possible, we'll also dry screen. So as I mentioned before, the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Hawaii, and the variety of other American battlefield monument cemeteries. So we are regularly doing disinterments throughout the cemeteries we have in Europe. And then Manila, I just got home from a trip to Manila for disinterments, working on the Cabanatuan project. Disinterments involve a lot of analysis of primary source documentation and acquisition of comparative ante-mortem data. So we work with the historical information, and we also work with information that was collected by forensic professionals back in the late 1940s. Individuals were not identified back in the 40s. Forensics has gotten a lot better since then. Science has advanced. We have DNA, and so that's why we're returning to those. Laboratory operations. We are a large laboratory spread across the country. Our large central laboratory is in Honolulu, Hawaii. We also have a large laboratory at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, and we have a small facility at Dayton, Ohio at Wright-Patterson. We are a multidisciplinary team. We have historians. We've got forensic anthropologists. We have archaeologists. We have forensic odontologists. We have quality assurance program. We have histologists. We have a wide variety of people that are always working. We always try to use multiple lines of evidence. We want to do a variety of different types of analyses on the evidentiary materials that we recover, and to try to get those independent lines to all point to a single individual. You can see them up here. I'm going to go through a few of them. Historians, everything starts with the historians, and they do a mountain of work to take the really big numbers that was spoken about in the policy brief to get it down to something that you can take a bite out of. So of all the losses we have, how many of them are P-47s? Right? If we're out looking for a P-47 in Europe, how many other P-47 crashes are within a kilometer? 10 kilometers. Right? Those are all sorts of things that we need to know, and that's the historians provide that really valuable information. We perform controlled excavations, archaeologists out in the field, and we're determining those associations between artifacts and remains if we're recovering that type of thing. So this is an example. A watch is found in direct association with some remains in the field, and we record all that information because that becomes important later when we're doing analysis of those material evidence items. So in addition to us having that provenience information that we recorded in the field, sometimes the photos that are provided by family members can become very important. There's that watch that we found, and there's the watch on the person's wrist in the photograph. Admittedly, this is pretty rare when this happens. We get really excited when it does, but it can help. We do an anthropological analysis of the skeletal remains. We always do it to the greatest extent possible that the remains allow. You don't always get a lot of remains depending upon your loss incident and your conflict. Anthropological analysis is done in the, quote, blind. It means that the analyst who is assigned to a case is only told two pieces of information: the box number they need to get out of storage and what conflict the individual is supposedly associated with. Americans got taller on average across the course of the 20th century, so you need to use a different comparative population when you're doing some of your statistics, but if you have a Vietnam loss versus a World War II loss. Other than that, the skeletal analyst is not told anything about the case. Nothing. Because we don't want to have any bias in their analysis, and that's why it's done in the, quote, blind. So they can work out, if you have a whole skeleton, the sex of the individual. It's predominantly male for us, just due to the nature of the populations we're working on. They can figure out the age at time of death, the likely ancestry, stature, or how tall somebody was. And they also look at trauma and pathology and other individual traits that can be seen on the skeleton. Only after this report is done and put through our quality assurance process and finalized does the analyst then get to compare what they determined from the bones to who the believed to be individual is when we look at their medical records and have their information. So sort of afterwards you find out. We also do ante-mortem, post-mortem chest x-rays. Everybody used to have to get a TB test before they went to serve in the Korean War. These days you just get a little blood test on the skin, but back then they took chest x-rays. They run from your neck down about to your belly button, and everybody who served in the Korean War got one of these. And we found out that the National Archives and Records Administration still had them in storage, so we called them up. We're like, hey, can we get those? We need about, I don't know, 8,000 of them. And they're like, well, you better get out here, because we're going to destroy them next week. How about no? We'll put some people on a plane. We'll be there immediately. So, National Archives and Records Administration helped us out. Surprise, money was found in the budget. Some people got on a plane, and we went and got all these x-rays. We chemically stabilized them, right, because they were old x-rays that were starting to deteriorate a little. So we chemically stabilized them. And then we took really high-resolution, large-format photographs of each one, and we put them all into a computer database. And then what we did is we got some really smart math and computer science people. And what we did is we traced every single clavicle or collarbone. And they did some math that allows you to create a written formula that describes that shape. And we did it for every single one, about 8,000 of them. Put them all in this database. And then what we're able to do now is we can take a clavicle and we can set it up on a little foam tray. We can take an x-ray of it. And then we trace that clavicle. So we've got a formula for that unknown. We've got formulas for all 8,000, and then we let the computer program do its thing. And then it gives you a short list, and then somebody hand checks it. And we developed this because in the past, for a lot of Korean War remains, they put a chemical version of kind of formaldehyde on the bones. And what it did is it cross-linked all the DNA. And in the past, it meant we couldn't get DNA out of those bones. But Dr. McMahon's going to talk about what his lab's up to. So his research team is amazing. So we do this too. We do antemortem, postmortem dental comparisons, right? Who's got cavities? I've got cavities. I've been to the dentist. My dentist has got my records on file. If you're in the military, you have to go to the dentist. It's not an option. You will go, and you will go when you're supposed to. All those records were kept. We've got copies of all of them. So when we find teeth, we can compare the teeth we recover in archaeological sites or our unilateral turnovers or disinterments to those dental records. And our odontologist can make matches that way. We also have forensic chemistry. This is our latest, newest project that we're working on. It's isotopes. You may have heard of like carbon-12 and carbon-14 or oxygen-16 and oxygen-18. There's slight differences in those atoms on the periodic table, those elements. And what we can do is we can measure the percentages out of teeth and bones of a variety of different elements, and we can figure out where somebody grew up. You can tell the difference between somebody who grew up in Portland and somebody who grew up in Seattle. So we can't ID anybody this way, but we can do exclusionary work to exclude individuals who maybe have similar mitochondrial DNA sequences. So we've got this. We're bringing it online right now. We, a couple of years ago, hired a brilliant woman to head this project. She was originally at the University of Utah, and we had researched her, and we decided we wanted to hire her. So we waited till the dead of winter, and there was a horrible, horrible storm in Salt Lake City. And we called her up, and we were like, hey, would you like to stand up your own isotope lab in Honolulu? Funny enough, she said yes. Yeah, it worked great. You just got to set yourself up for success. It worked perfect. She's been on board for 2 years, standing up the project, and we're starting to see really excellent results out of it now. DNA plays a huge role in what we do. That is all I'm going to say because the next briefer, Dr. Tim McMahon, is going to talk about nothing but DNA. Identification process. So we're going to walk through an example, right? So here's an example from the Korean War. Approximately 7,600 still missing. And the historians got to work on it, right? 7,600 is a big number to start with. So the historians looked at one battle that occurred over a couple of days and how many guys are missing from that, right? 63. That's good work by the historians. It gets you from thousands down to a few dozen that we're going to start to work on, right? So That's what we know we're looking for from this particular engagement. We go out and run an archaeological excavation. We do all that careful excavation work, recording all the provenience and all the information we can. This is in North Korea, back when we were still allowed to work in North Korea. It's where this excavation was. And this is what we find. We find that there are remains of 2 individuals based upon the excavation. One individual's on the bottom, as you can see in black. And he's not laid in the grave very carefully. His arms are kind of up and off to the side, and then there's parts of another individual that are laid on top of him, but feet to head, not arranged with the head in the same direction. And this is a really strong indication that they were not, these individuals were not buried by friendly forces. And that's not how you bury your friends. U.S. military, when you have to do a field expedient burial, they're buried arms at their side. They're going to be lined up nicely. They're not going to be put on top of each other. Right? So that's a good indication. That's what that careful archaeology is telling us. Right? Not buried by friendly forces. Back to the historians, right? We take this information back to them. They start to do some more research, and they figure out of these 63, 42 were buried by United Nations forces. So it's probably not those guys. What we've got left is 21. Our list is getting shorter. We bring the remains home. We're going to talk about the more complete skeleton. Anthropological analysis determines that it's a male, most likely of African descent, right about the age range, and how tall they were. They also noted some additional observations about the skeleton, which I mentioned. How many of those 21 are going to fit that profile? 6. We're getting closer. Dental analysis. He's got some cavities. He's got erupted molars, third molars in the back in his mandible. He has unerupted molars in his maxilla, and he's got a couple of large cavities. So we check those teeth against his dental records. Perfect match. Right? Erupted, unerupted, cavities. One guy's got that. So outstanding. In addition, there was a letter in the file that had been written to the military at the time by one of his loved ones that mentions that he has a large gap between his 2 front teeth called a diastema. So it's a fancy word for gap between your teeth. And this letter is in there. It says he has a gap between his 2 front teeth. He has a gap between his 2 front teeth. So we were able to make this identification this way. It always begins with a controlled excavation. The science that we do in the field is just as rigorous as the science we do in the laboratory, and just as rigorous as the science that Dr. McMahon's team does. It's just a different part of science. We always work through as many lines of evidence as we can to get them to focus down to a single individual. And we always need antemortem comparison data. So that is the family reference samples. So if you have already given a family reference sample, thank you very much. If you think you might be eligible, go see Tim's staff. And they can help you figure out if you are someone that we need. Finally, I want to give a quick special projects update. In addition to the 3 mentioned during the policy brief, we have a large list of special projects. I want you to know that if your missing loved one is part of one of these special projects, there is a dedicated team for each one of these projects. They are headed up by a senior forensic anthropologist on our staff, and depending upon the size of the project, determines how many people are on it. But every day when they come in, they work on these projects. Okay. One big factor in all these special projects that makes them very difficult is the commingling, right? We wish that you'd open up one box and get one skeleton. You don't get that. You get this. You get multiple different individuals per box. This is Cabanatuan prison camp from the Philippines. You can see, right, each different color on the skeleton is a different individual that all was in one box. Right? This is a pretty challenging one. It's a project we're working our way through. This is USS Oklahoma. This is exceptionally, exceptionally challenging. Each casket that we took out of the ground had 8 to 10 bundles, and a bundle's just a wrapped up blanket with padding that has bone in it. So each casket has 8 to 10 bundles. Each bundle has an average commingling rate of 80%. So there's probably on average 8 different people in each bundle. There are 492 bundles. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, but it's the cardboard side of the piece up, and there's no box with a picture on it. So there's a lot of work that goes in to working through this largely through DNA, which is going to be talked about. You can also see, sometimes you don't get whole pieces, sometimes you get very, very small pieces. In this particular image in the center, you'll see all the boxes outlined in blue. Each box is a different individual of all those remains were recovered from the same site. This is a Solomon Islands case. It's exhaustive work. We never stop. Maybe we are held up by our science today. If that's the case, the remains sit in storage, and as our science get better, we revisit those remains. We never give up working on any of these things. 2019, fiscal year 217 identifications. I'm going to now turn it over to Dr. Tim McMahon of the Armed Forces Medical Examiner System, and he is going to talk to you all about DNA.
Good afternoon. I promise it's getting toward lunchtime. I'm going to move fast. You know, I don't want to miss my lunch either. I promise. During my interview back in 2000 when I joined the Armed Forces Medical Examiner, I came right out of grad school, and one of the questions that my mentor asked me at the AFMES was, spell DNA, all right, deoxyribonucleic acid. So I'm DEXO, and he goes, no, son, spell DNA. I said, okay, DNA. He says, that's right, keep it simple, scientist. And I said, okay, got it. So I promise, I'm going to try and keep it simple. So we're going to talk about who we are, a little bit about DNA. I'll make it fun. And then the way ahead, and you've heard over and over today where you guys fit in. Okay, I get a DNA result. If I don't have that reference, it's just a DNA result. So we'll finish up with that. So we are the Armed Forces Medical Examiner System. We were established in 1988. 1991, we actually generated our first mitochondrial DNA sequence to support the identification of an unknown service member from Vietnam. 1991 was also a big year because it was the end of Operation Desert Storm. There were a number of service members who could not be identified by fingerprint or dental. DNA was very young at the time, and so we had to outsource that. But we had to go back to the grieving families and ask for references. So in 1992, two big things happened. We established the Family Reference Database System, which I own, which we collect. So we've been collecting references from Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos losses, and from Korea, and starting in about 2007 from World War II. So we have all of those references. But we established the Armed Forces Repository Specimen Samples for the Identification of Remains. It took me 2 years to memorize that one. But I have a little over 8.1 million DNA reference cards for all of our active duty, reserve, and National Guard service members on file. And because of that, because of what we did for the past accounting, with Operation Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom, there were a little over 650 service members that if we did not have those DNA cards on file, they would not have been identified. So I do both current day and past accounting. We're an accredited laboratory, just like the Owens Lab, the SIL. And what that accredited means is every 4 years you have to get reaccredited. And so that means you have to get, in our case, we had 15 forensic scientists from around the country come into our lab for a week. And they go through all of our standard operating procedures, all of our processes, and compare them. And then we get reaccredited. So 2 years ago, we went through our reaccreditation with 0 findings. And so that gives you confidence that what we're doing meets the scientific rigor of an international forensic standard. What this slide is basically showing is that we are mission partners, but we basically have different parents. And by different parents, our money comes from different trees. But we're unified under a single mission. And that's to bring your loved one home. And that's what ties us all together. As I said, I do present day accounting, I do past accounting. I have an FRS or family reference specimen. I have 12 scientists dedicated just to running those family references. But we also have a worldwide support. So we support the National Transportation Bureau if an airplane goes down. We do that. 9/11, we did samples there. We helped with the Haiti earthquake and things like that. So we have a worldwide presence when it comes to doing DNA. This was us in 2013. This was, I had 6 teams, and you can see I had 45 scientists. The NDA 2010 said I needed to build capability and capacity to support 200 IDs. We weren't getting the funding. So I sat in a meeting, I said, I'll give you a plan. I'll increase our productivity by 30%. So to go from 1,000 analyses to 1,300 analyses, but we'll be tapped. We did 42% increase that year. So what that allowed is me to get the funding. Initially, I was only supposed to be able to hire 24 scientists. But through optimizations, I was able to hire 47 new staff for the past accounting mission. So as of now, what you're looking at, we're at 79 scientists that are dedicated just to processing past accounting samples, and I have 13 scientists who are processing all of our family reference. So we doubled the number we had with the same budget. So let's talk about DNA. That big blue blob that you see there, I want you to think of your computer. That's like the hard drive. Okay, you got one hard drive in the computer. That's your nuclear DNA. That's half the DNA you get from mom and from dad. And you get, and I call it identity by descent. I want you to think of a tree. I said if the tree, the trunk is thickest, I have half the DNA of my parents. But as you go up the trunk, it thins out. So I have a quarter of my grandparents, an eighth of my great-grandparents, and so on. Mathematically, I can do that. Now, when it comes to siblings, I may share 50% of my DNA, and I want you to think of branches. They're thickest there, but it may not be the same 50%. But by the time you get to your first cousin, you're only sharing about 12% of your nuclear DNA. And so the farther out you go, the more references you would need if we were just doing nuclear DNA. So I'm going to talk about all the different DNA testing that we do. So your nuclear DNA, these are called chromosomes. There's 23 pairs. 22 of those tell you what hair color you're going to, how fast you're going to go gray. And the 23rd determines if you're going to be a male or a female. Okay? So for males, we have a Y chromosome. There's actual tests that we can do for the Y chromosome. Although there are a lot of really good markers on the Y chromosome, there are some that still have to be validated. But, gentlemen, I hate to tell you, we do not have, we have selective hearing called the HUD gene. But ladies, we do have the ability to ask for directions. It's called the DIR gene. So we may not hear you all the time, but we do know how to ask for directions. So, as we talk about, time is not our friend. So DNA degrades in the environment. Heat, snow, wet, all of that. And this is a very simple model. If I gave you a 16-inch piece of string, I told you to fold it in half and cut it to represent every year, by 5 years, you would have 32 half-inch pieces of DNA at year 6. The easiest, this looks great. I wish it would degrade that way, perfectly uniform. If you really want to know how it degrades, take a box of spaghetti, put it on the floor and stomp on it, and pour it out. Okay, you're going to get size of spaghetti all over the place. Okay? And in that is not just human DNA. We have to worry about bacterial DNA, fungal DNA, all of this. So we have to figure out how are we going to get the DNA out of it. So what we do, we develop smaller and smaller ways to target the DNA. And if you can see here, we call them mini primer sets. We can, those 1.5-inch pieces of DNA we can go after. Okay, let's just think of 1.5-inch piece. And this worked great. We started this in 1998. We had 90% success rate. It was really good. 65% of our cases go into this right now. So we're running really good with that. Most of your state and local crime labs will have 2 STR kits online. We have 4. Why? We don't like not getting a result. We want to have multiple tools in our toolbox to be able to get that result. But you can see that 200 box right there, that's like a 2-inch piece of DNA. I just told you 65% of our cases are we're down at the 1-inch piece of DNA. So we've had to optimize how we can keep our results successful. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Nuclear DNA. You know, when I did criminal casework, if the question I'm asking, who against the general world's population of 7.6 billion people committed that crime? Sure, I'm going to lead with nuclear DNA. I need that direct reference. Okay. Problem is, a lot of my references are first cousins. As you can see here, first cousin, 12.5% DNA. It's tough enough for the Army's casualties sometimes to find one cousin. If I was going to go with nuclear DNA, I would need 5 or 6 cousins to get the same result as one maternal reference. So we utilize all DNA. It gives us the greatest chance of success. We are doing about 700 samples on a rolling basis. DPA sets the priority. Our average turnaround time is 55 mission days. So that's from when I extract the DNA or pull the DNA out of the bone to when I give a report to the DPAA. Sounds like a lot of time. Got to tell you a caveat though. I have to do everything in duplicate. So I have to extract it twice. I have to run it through all the procedures, and if the 2 answers match, we report it out to the DPAA. That's 55 days. Most of your state and local crime labs will do a modern crime sample that they do once in 55 days. So we're doing pretty good. So why do we lead with mitochondrial DNA analysis? Well, really up until about 2006, it was the only thing that we could get out of challenged DNA samples, was the mitochondrial DNA. And so our databases grew starting in 1992 with that maternal side. But once we could get to the nuclear DNA, it opened up our databases. So think of a 5,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. If I took all of the border pieces out of it and told you to put it together, you'd want to shoot me, right? So what we do is we use the mitochondrial DNA to establish the borders, and then we use the pinpoint STR tests to identify the next piece that's the right piece to fit in there to lead to an identification if we need to. This colorful slide, each one of those colors is a test. There's certain key points that you need to do. As you can see the little numbers on the top, last year I reported 3,765 analyses. Okay, you have to actually double that number because I got to do it in duplicate, but that's what we reported to the DPA. So each year we've been over 3,000. Our goal this year is 4,400. We've done a little over 1,500 right now. We're right on track to make that. Okay, so 3,700 analyses, 217 IDs we supported last year. That's great. Tell you I'm putting a lot through. The top part's what's important. For a non-chemically treated bone sample, 94% of the time I get a DNA result. 70% of the time I get an STR result. And 60% of the time I get a next generation sequencing. Those are for those chemically treated. So what that means is we have a very high return on our testing. We don't give up because we want to bring the answers. We want to be able to support that identification. What this means is, for example, there were 217 new IDs in 2019. We wrote 207 believed to be reports. That means 207 reports that for the first time a sequence matched a family reference. So we supported 207 of the 217 IDs. This year we've already at 57 first time named reports, but the big part is the total reports. So last year we wrote 658. Why? Dr. O'Leary talked about commingling. I would love to be able to say I got this bone and then know whatever other bone that matches it would be. We don't. In a commingling case, we're always going to find additional portions. Or if they go back to a recovery site, there may be additional portions as we're looking for that last person. Why does it take time? Okay, CSI fans here? It'd be great if I could do it in 45 minutes, but why does it take time? The biggest part is forensics instruments and kit are geared to modern DNA samples, to crime labs. And the other one is, if it's not out there, We have to create it. Industry is not creating it. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about fit for use. 2006, we wanted to get better results. So up until 2006, you can see that basically the leg bones gave us a 90% success rate. This new buffer we call demineralization, I want you to think of turpentine. You put turpentine on the hood of your car, it dissolves the paint. We developed a buffer that would dissolve the bone completely. What it did is it took us from needing 5 grams of bone to only needing 0.2 grams of bone. So it opened up a whole lot more bone for testing, and we have a higher success rate across all of the bones that we test now. We publish that, and every lab in the world and doing bones are doing demin protocols that we published. Purification, okay? You know that Brita water filter that you have? Or that last cup of coffee that nobody wants to drink because of the grinds? If I pass that coffee back through a filter, I get pure coffee. Well, what we did is we found a special mechanism that the DNA will bind to a filter, and we can wash away the bad stuff that's causing problems. And so what you see is in FY13, our success rates were STRs are 24%. A couple slides back, I showed you we were at 70%. It's because we found a new method. We optimized the method to be able to increase our success rates. Korea Punch Bowl, we've heard about that. You know, these are the chemically, Dr. O'Leary talked about formaldehyde, cross-linking the DNA to the protein. It took us 16 years in science to catch up, but in 2013, we were able to show that we were getting DNA. And you remember all the way back I said that we have mechanisms to go after 1-inch pieces of DNA? The DNA coming out of these chemically treated samples were 1/2-inch pieces of DNA. But once we knew the size of the DNA, we could develop a method. So in 2016, we became the first lab and currently the only forensics lab who has this method online. We issued our first report on St. Patrick's Day of 2016, and it's a slow process. Initially, we were at 5 samples per month. But 3 years later, we've done over 1,500 samples. Our overall success rate is 53%. It crosses and to be utilized with Korean, World War II, and Vietnam samples. And we're up to 43 samples per month. And I just purchased new instruments that are going to allow me to quadruple that number of samples per month. And we're in the process of validating those instruments currently right now. So I talked about CSI. We're approaching CSI. What you see there is a rapid DNA instrument. You may have heard about it in the news. It was used during the California wildfires, that dive boat incident in California. I can take a swab, I can put it in there in 45 minutes, I can have a DNA profile. Sounds great, right? Works real good with modern DNA samples. So even fresh bone from the wildfires, there's a lot of red blood cells in there, a lot of bone marrow. That's what you're really testing. We looked at it. It's going to fit for my current day operations. It's going to fit there perfectly fine. I can actually start to use that and adopt it. But for past accounting, when we're dealing with bones, not going to work. So we looked at it. We're working with the company. Not going to work, unfortunately, with what we're doing for past accounting. So new method development. Unrepaired DNA. So remember I talked about DNA damage. All those green lines in there, green usually we associate with good. Here, green is bad. Means we're not going to get results from it. So we're working with universities, and there are methods out there that we're assessing to repair DNA. So what you actually see here is one of the repair mechanisms, the exact same DNA now worked. So we're actively working to see if we can, those 7% of the samples or 6% that we don't get results from, can we repair that DNA? Genetic genealogy. Anyone done Ancestry.com, 23andMe? Okay. So the big buzzword now is genetic genealogy. You know, where did I come from, who am I related to, and all of that. Okay. And it really became popular in 2018 with the Golden State Killer. 1975, 1986, crime spree murders and rapes. Not a very nice guy. 1986, they kept one of the crime scene samples. As technology got better, they ran the sample. They searched an open DNA database called GEDmatch. The investigators were able to link it to a family member and then use investigative leads to identify. Okay? So that was 2018. In 2015, working with DOD, we funded a project with a company called Parabon to develop a method utilizing similar technology but would work on degraded DNA. So we're in the 4th year of this project right now. It is getting toward the point that it's working. What you see here is with as little as 1,100 markers out of 15,000, it was able to identify the right family reference out of 6. And in these cases, these were people who had common mitochondrial DNA sequences. Okay? But what does this method gain me? Well, it's a nuclear method, so it leads to a nuclear ID. But the biggest part it does is it opens up anyone to be a reference. So in certain instances where I only have a paternal niece right now, I don't have a mitochondrial reference, the living member is a paternal niece, she now becomes a viable reference for us. Okay? So that opens up a whole pool of new references for us. So what we're looking to do is enhance our laboratory processing using automation. We want to be cheaper, better, faster. Why? Because we want to get more results to the DPA lab so that we can spur those investigative leads, so we can narrow it down and pinpoint the individual who those remains belong to. Can't do it, as we've heard over and over, I cannot do it without you, the family members. References are important. Please stop by our table. We have the list of everyone who's here. We will look up, we will let you know what type of references we have. Unfortunately, we collect them under informed consent. We consider them a medical record. So you know when you go to the doctor and you have to sign that HIPAA statement? I'm legally bound by HIPAA as well. I can't tell you who donated. I can tell you that I have 2 maternal nephews, but I can't tell you who they are. Our database is secured. When it comes in, we give it a unique case number. DPA doesn't have access to my database. Only my trained scientists have access to the database. It is not searchable by your state, local, federal crime labs like the CODIS system. It is an internal database only. We take it very seriously in protecting all of that. So, now I know I covered a lot of things very quickly, but if you go to the Armed Forces Medical Examiner system under health.mil or to the DPA site, there is DNA frequently asked questions that are about 25 of them with very detailed descriptions of everything I covered today. Plus, I'm here all day. So thank you very much.
All right, folks, so before we go to our morning Q&A session, I do have receipts. I believe the name is Buzek family. For the Egan family. For the, it looks like McConnell family. And the Elweld family. So right after this, if you can just get with me. So at this time, what I'd like to do is have those that briefed this morning, please come forward. And while we wait on them to come up, just got numbers from our live stream. As of about 10 minutes ago, we've been able to reach over 4,200 people outside this room this morning. Rob, do we know where Dr. O'Leary is? Okay, so while we're waiting, and we're going to take lunch, and I'm probably going to give you all a little bit more time for lunch, primarily because I just want to make sure that no one's rushed. But when we start, the Korean, actually, I'll go with the World War II breakout session this afternoon. We'll come right back into here. The Korean War family, Korean Cold War families will go right next door in the Pine Room, and the Vietnam War families will go right next door this side in the Furs Room. Yes, sir. So what we're going to do when we start asking questions, and I'm waiting for two briefers to come forward so that we have everybody. So if you do have a question, what I would ask that you raise your hand and wait for a microphone to come to you. And what I would also ask is that your questions be based on the briefings from this morning. If you have a specific question about your unaccounted for loved one, please take that up either with your service casualty office or your DPA analyst. So with that, are we ready, Rob? We'll wait on, Dr. Owen will be here in a moment. Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead and open up the questions. And we got one right here.
For Dr. McMahon, I've already submitted the DNA sample, and I believe the cousin has as well. Would it be beneficial to get more family members involved for that?
So to answer your question, we'd have to stop by the table. So the answer to is we usually are looking to get 2 maternal, 2 paternal, which comes down, and then autos if we have them. And just to let anyone know, if you've previously donated, we maintain all of those samples. So every sample that we've collected since 1992, we have stored in evidence freezers. We can always go back to them, so we don't need to recollect. You don't have to worry about if a loved one's passed away that we don't have their reference. We do. That's why we collected 2 blood spots at the time, or 3 swabs. So we have all of the references that we did. But what I would say is, following us, if we're missing one, say a paternal reference, we will walk through a tree with you and get you. And if you know of those individuals, then we'll have you talk with your service casualty offices. Because the service casualty offices are belly button to the families. They actually will send a kit directly to the individual. There will be a FedEx label in there, and that kit will directly come back to our lab. It's the fastest way to get it done. Great question.
Morning. I was glad to see that you're standing up more scientists and you're getting to the DNA. I'm wondering how many samples do we have that have not been DNA sequenced? So how many potential loved ones are out there waiting to be potentially identified?
So that's a good question. We typically work on a first in, first out basis. Each year we're getting, we can anywhere from 10 samples per month to hundreds of samples per month. We work on a first in or priority if DPA tells us a priority. It's tough to say because of the fact that I'll give you a perfect example. With USS Oklahoma, the disinterments took about 6 months to go through all of those. We ended up with 4,700 samples. And so, but we had a 5-year plan for that. And so we're actually into the last 100 samples now. And the plan was to wrap up in December of this year. And so they're intermixed with a lot based on the disinterment plans and things like that. The part is we get asked that a lot is, if I have more people, can I do it faster? Faster actually for science is not a good thing. Okay, we don't want to exceed the science capability. We don't want to make that mistake. And that's why we do everything in duplicate. And we have layers of review. So for every analysis that occurs when it goes into review. It goes through primary review by an independent scientist not associated with that case. And then it goes through secondary review of another, and then it goes through a third layer before we report that. And all that is in that 55 days that we're talking about. So I can get a number if you want. We can talk. I can give you a number. It just varies because of the disinterment plans that are going on, as well as the recovery operations based on the amount of samples that they. But we are working through those at about 700 samples on a rolling basis. We're reporting out 380 analyses per month to get to where we want to go, and that's up from in 2013 we only did 1,300 analysis that year. We're shooting for 4,400 this year. So, thank you, ma'am.
Could you speak to the desirability of getting a DNA sample if the action reports, are from an area where there's no known findings? Like our missing relative is in North Korea. The action report says there's no bodies were found there. So, is there any use in having the DNA in the data bank?
And that's an excellent question, specifically with Korea, because of, we have the 208 boxes remains that came back between 1992 and 1994, as well as these K-55. Having that reference on hand helps a lot. So for example, with Korea, we're at about 92% coverage of the 8,100 missing, but having that on hand allows us to determine if your loved one is a more common mitochondrial sequence or a unique sequence. But the way the war went is we pushed all the way up to the chosen and then got pushed down. There's a good chance that individuals where they initially thought may have ended up somewhere else. So having that on hand early prevents delay later on. So if we could, I would say get them in, let's have them in the system, because you never know what's going to happen.
And my question is about the archaeological site or the excavation site. If it's marked open in the report, how will you determine whether you'll go back to it or not?
If a site has been opened and it remains in an open status, the scientific recommendation is to go back, because if it is left open at the end of an excavation, we believe that there is a likelihood to recover additional evidentiary material at that location.
Out of the 55 boxes that came back, is there an educated guess as to how many commingles you might have in them? I mean, there's hope. I'm hoping that there's hundreds, but I don't know if you're getting at the end of any more hope.
What we can say is Dr. O'Leary talked about isotopic testing, and there are a little over 500 bone elements that came back in those 55. We got about 470, 480 to test. The delta between those two were a number that isotopic testing showed had an Asian diet, so we didn't have to test those. From those remaining 480, we got them in November of 18, and by July of 19, we had gone through all of the mitochondrial DNA testing, and we had about 250 unique mitochondrial DNA sequences. Now, I'm going to caveat that's 250 unique. Now, doesn't mean it's a U.S., it could be one of our NATO allies as well, but there were 250 unique sequences that we're working through now through this, what we call the scientific process, and it's a rigorous process so that we can dot our I's and cross our T's and get to that, like I said, to get to that individual. It takes a combined effort of all the information that we're doing. So, about 250 unique sequences.
There's a plan in the works to close the National Archive in Seattle, Washington. I assume there are similar plans for other archives. Do we need to be concerned about that?
No, so none of us up here are aware that the National Archives are closing in Seattle.
We just don't have that information. But if you believe that there is case-related information there, we of course need to know about it. But we'll go back, we'll take that question back and try to figure out what's going on, because that's the first that we've heard about a NARA facility being closed. Yeah, well, yeah. Oh, real here in the Northwest, yeah. Yeah, so we will look into that, because we don't have any information. At least they have not contacted us saying, you know, they're about to close, and therefore we need to determine disposition of the records that they're currently holding. But we will definitely look into that, because we, internal to DPAA, amongst the 700 plus that we have working for us, we do have archivists and records managers. In fact, we have a NARA inspection. They're going to come in this summer and inspect us to make sure that we are handling our records properly. So I certainly will take that question back and find out what's going on. Thank you for that.
I noticed on this one report where you listed your special objects or specific battles. Solomon Islands is waiting for history findings. Can you give me any information on that, since my dad was over in the Solomon Islands?
Can you please repeat the question, ma'am?
It says right here on the Solomon Islands, it says awaiting for historical research. What, my dad is over there someplace, so I would like to know what that entails.
We have dedicated historians who are doing research on Solomon Islands and Solomon Island losses. So yeah, we have historians that are actively engaged in Solomon Islands. That's their focus of their job every day when they come in. We are also actively running missions in Solomon Islands. We've got some scheduled for this summer, so we're actively working on that. Did you have a one-on-one today, ma'am? Did you have a one-on-one today? Okay.
Hi, I have a question. What percentage of remains are you holding on to before you notify the families? If you have a piece that's identified in one of the sites, but they've got a lot of commingling going on, and say you only have 2 bones, as opposed to, what percentage are you waiting to notify the families?
So it's not just a percentage. It is when for that bone, let's say a single bone, if all the evidence is ready to be presented to the Armed Forces Medical Examiner, Dr. Barron, who is out at the DPA lab, for him to review, and as the medical examiner, he is the one who is authorized to make the identification. He will review that, whether it's a single bone or multiple bones. Because remember, we talked about those addendum reports or those additional portions. It's about having the scientific evidence to make that identification. And that's up to Dr. Barron at that time. They don't hold, we're not holding. We have to have that scientific rigor to make that identification.
A good example is like the K55 boxes. When we send all of those DNA samples to Dr. McMahon's lab, he may send back a result. Maybe because it's the first one we sent in, it's the first thing we get back, and maybe it turns out it's John Doe. Well, we know it's John Doe. Well, we're going to wait on that one a little bit till more results come back in from Dr. McMahon's lab. So, this other bone is John Doe, this other bone's John Doe, until we have enough that it convinces Dr. Barron that for an identification.
And then also, just for your information, as soon as the service member is identified, we immediately notify the Service Casualty Office. And by regulation, between 24 and 48 hours, they will then reach out to the primary next of kin.
Thank you very much. You're doing God's work, and thank you for supporting us. Appreciate it very much. My question really turns it around and say, is there support you need from us that we can get behind? Specifically, it was very impressive to see the trajectory and the pace of the science and what you're accomplishing there. And are you resource limited in any way? By that I mean, if you had more support or money, could that trajectory and pace be improved at all? And to what degree, is this a financial question? I know that this gets wound up in politics as well, but I've just got to believe that it was very impressive the number of scientists you added and how you've changed the trajectory. And I don't expect you to be able to, or to step into this piece, but I look at the Defense Department budgeting, and I just wonder, as a person that you're trying to support, if 10% of what was diverted from the Department of Defense's budget to build a wall that Mexico will not be paying for would improve the work that you do and the way you're trying to support us. I realize I just rolled a hand grenade out there, and we don't have to frame this up around that political endpoint. But it would be useful to know are the resources that are available to you currently constraining in any way? And if so, then it opens the door for the multiple avenues to work this one, whether that be political or otherwise. Thank you.
So my funding is different from the DPAA's funding, and so ours is a little bit different. If Congress was to come and say, hey, I'm going to give you AFMEs $1 million this year, I could buy reagents, I could buy that, and that may allow me to increase a little bit, but I can't buy headcount, I can't buy scientists with that. And so if you want to talk to your representatives, your senators, for me it has to be in my baseline budget. It has to be augmented so it's a permanent increase. When it's a permanent increase, that means every year after that, I can count on that. Then I can buy a head count. Head count allows me to generate more results and get that way. So that's a little bit different. We function different. Our limiting factor of always is the scientist.
Right, and so I love how you described rolling out a grenade, hand grenade, because I would like to have a job when I go back to work on Monday. So my answer will be measured, but much like Dr. McMahon, for this year specifically, I talked earlier about our budget being $168 million. It was $168 million because Congress gave us $24 million more, right? And so when you have ads on top of the base, you can't plan because you don't get the ad until the year starts. So if those ads were constantly and consistently in our base, let's just throw the number out there, 168, since that's what they gave us, we could plan so much better, and we could be much more efficient and effective in how we execute that funding, because we would know in the next year out, we can plan our operations and all of the support mechanisms to those operations up to that level. So right now we're planning at a much lower level, and then we get our ads, and then we have to now replan and add additional onto that. So, it's not about building a bigger organization, hiring many more people, because as you heard, what we do is very specialized, right? And there aren't a whole lot of people out there able to do this type of work. And then also, we've had, as I told you earlier, I'm also responsible for personnel hiring. We've hired people, and this isn't for everybody. Even when they come with the expertise and experience, this isn't for everybody. And so, we could never build an agency large enough to deal with 81,000 missing. So back to your question, we thank the Congress immensely for the ads. We also thank Tim McMahon's leadership at DHA, I'm sorry, DHA. There's so many D's and H's in, right? DHA for continuing to fund AFMEs. And then the other piece that's important that it doesn't get talked about a lot because they are never in the room when we have these Q&As, and that's our service casualty offices. They are responsible for doing the genealogy piece, right? And so they also, right? And so we had someone, I talked to someone today who I know he's going to log onto our website and volunteer to help us with genealogy. But those service casualty offices also need to be funded with regards to their genealogy contract is how they pay for that work. So we can't make IDs if we don't have family reference samples, and we can't get family reference samples if we don't know who to contact. So you all coming here today is a first step in your ability to really help us. Staying involved, staying engaged, passing the word, seeing this audience today, I guess almost doubled since the last time we were here, which is huge. So we got to keep getting the word out. You guys continue to stay involved and connected to us and connected to your service casualty offices. Did I answer your question? He's funny. Thank you, sir. You're awesome. I don't know that we have a volunteer comedian position for you. But, thank you.
You mentioned in one of your early slides where time is not your friend when it comes to DNA testing, and yet you're testing clear back to World War II, it sounds like, still. I guess at what point does the DNA become such a challenge that you have to turn to other resources or some alternative, or does that point ever come about?
So that's an excellent question. As of right now, we've actually gone as far back as the Spanish-American War and even the Revolutionary War and done. The biggest thing is you saw with the next generation sequencing, we can get down to these, what I call half-inch pieces of DNA. If you look at your DNA, there's 3.2 billion base pairs, big astronomical number. We right now are targeting 50 base pair. And so I think if we get much smaller than the 50 base pair, it may become very, very difficult, because then it's going to be tough to figure out if you're picking up contamination versus authentic at that point. But right now, I think we have the ability to keep going back with this, and we're developing new technology. We're looking at new technology, and there's always stuff being developed in the research field that we'll keep an eye on. So, but good question.
All right, folks, so if I can have a round of applause for our briefers. And then just a little bit more information on the breakout room. So what they're going to end up doing over lunch is they're going to close this room, and that room becomes the FERS. So that's where the Vietnam War families will be. So if you have stuff on the tables and you're not in the Vietnam War group, so again, this will be the World War II, and then next door will be Korean Cold War. So just make sure that you move your stuff. So since we've gone a little bit over, so we'll start back up at 2:15. And again, I did call out some names, and let me call them out one more time. From table 5.